In early October 2025, the mountainous border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, a line drawn in a different century, became the front line of a new and devastating conflict. What began as a series of targeted airstrikes quickly spiraled into the most intense fighting the region had seen since the Taliban's return to power. This is a deep dive into how the 2025 Pak-Afghan War unfolded, a conflict defined by competing claims, frantic military maneuvers, and a deepening humanitarian crisis. We will trace the timeline of events using maps to show exactly where clashes occurred and what was at stake for the millions caught in the middle. The central incident that ignited this firestorm was Pakistani airstrikes deep inside Afghanistan on 9th of October. Islamabad said its goal was to eliminate sanctuaries for the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, a militant group that has waged a bloody insurgency against Pakistan for years. The primary target was reportedly TTP leader Nur Wali Mehsud. For Pakistan, the strikes were an act of self-defense against a persistent terrorist threat it accused the Afghan Taliban of harboring. For the Taliban government in Kabul, it was a grave violation of sovereignty, an act of aggression demanding an immediate, forceful response. This video explores the critical questions after the first strikes. What exactly happened in those chaotic first days? We will examine competing narratives. One side claimed to have neutralized hundreds of terrorists. The other claimed to have killed dozens of enemy soldiers and captured military posts. Where did these events take place? We will use detailed maps to pinpoint airstrikes in Kabul, Jalalabad, and ground battles in Helmand and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The closure of major border crossings severed vital economic and social lifelines, trapping civilians and halting the flow of goods. The conflict threatened a new wave of refugees and risked destabilizing a region already facing economic hardship and political uncertainty. This is how a long-simmering dispute erupted into open warfare, with profound implications for South Asia and the wider world. The conflict began in the pre-dawn hours of October 9, 2025, when the skies over several Afghan cities were pierced by the roar of jet engines and the impact of explosions. Pakistan confirmed it had conducted precise airstrikes in Kabul, Khost, Jalalabad, and Paktika. The declared target was Nur Wali Mehsud, who was believed to be operating near Abdul Haq Square in Kabul. The response from Kabul was swift and uncompromising. Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid condemned the strikes as a violation of Afghan territory and airspace. Vowing retaliation, the Afghan Ministry of Defense prepared its forces. Spokesperson Inayatullah Khwarazmi said, Afghan forces would defend their airspace and respond strongly. By October 11th, rhetoric translated into action, turning a targeted strike into a full-blown border war. As fighting erupted along the Durand Line, the information war began in earnest. Claims from both sides painted irreconcilable pictures. The Taliban announced a stunning, though unverified, victory. They claimed to have killed 58 Pakistani soldiers, wounded 30, and captured 25 Pakistani army posts. Pakistan, in contrast, presented a narrative of a decisive operation. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said the army had given a befitting reply. The Pakistani military claimed to have neutralized more than 200 Taliban and affiliated terrorists. They acknowledged 23 soldiers killed on their side. The physical and political landscape of this conflict is dominated by one feature, the Durand Line. This 2,600-kilometer border was drawn up by the British in 1893. The terrain itself is a formidable challenge, composed of rugged, inhospitable mountains and remote, arid valleys, easy for militant groups to use as clandestine transit routes. The two most significant crossings are Torkham and Shaman. When closed, as they were on October 11th, they become symbols of frozen diplomacy and impending conflict. On one side of this conflict stands the Pakistan Armed Forces, one of the largest and most powerful military institutions in the region. Facing them are the Armed Forces of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. While they lack the advanced air power and heavy weaponry of the Pakistani military, they possess decades of experience in asymmetric warfare and an intimate knowledge of the rugged border terrain. At the very heart of this conflict is the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, commonly known as the TTP. This militant group is not a state actor, but its actions are the primary catalyst for the war. The TTP's declared goal is to overthrow Pakistan's elected government. They seek to establish their own emirate governed by a severe and uncompromising interpretation of Islamic law. The TTP's strength and operational capacity have surged since the Afghan Taliban's return to power in August 2021. With their ideological allies controlling Kabul, the TTP found renewed sanctuary. As predicted, the conflict dramatically escalated on October 11th. The first major clashes erupted along the northern section of the Durand Line, specifically in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Afghan forces initiated attacks on multiple Pakistani border posts. The fighting was not a mere exchange of small arms fire. Reports from both sides indicated the use of heavy weaponry. The Pakistani military responded in kind, bringing its superior firepower to bear. Artillery units began shelling suspected Afghan troop concentrations, and tanks were deployed. While intense fighting raged in the north, a second front opened up in the south on October 11th, stretching the Pakistani military's resources. In a specific and highly publicized claim, the Afghan Ministry of Defense stated that its forces had successfully captured 2 Pakistani border posts located in the vicinity of the Chaman crossing. Pakistan's military leadership was now faced with a multi-front war. The opening of this southern front had significant strategic implications, forcing Pakistan to divide its attention and resources. In the chaotic days of early October, the true human cost of the conflict became obscured by a thick fog of propaganda and wildly divergent official reports. The stark reality is that independent verification of these casualty figures was, and remains, virtually impossible. With journalists and international observers barred from accessing the active conflict zones, the real number of soldiers and fighters killed on both sides is probably somewhere between the official extremes, a tragic and unknown figure representing hundreds of lives lost in a matter of days. The decision by Pakistan on October 11th to seal the entire 2,600-kilometer border was a strategic move that weaponized economics, with devastating humanitarian consequences. The shutdown immediately halted the flow. Trucks were stranded in vast, sprawling queues, their perishable cargoes rotted under the sun. The blockade had an immediate and severe impact on markets deep inside Afghanistan. In Kabul, prices for essential commodities began to skyrocket. The closure also trapped thousands of people, turning crossings into makeshift refugee camps. Afghans in Pakistan for medical treatment or business were suddenly stranded. The shutdown crippled the operations of the few remaining international aid organizations. Shipments of medical equipment and emergency food rations could not get through. Beyond the grim statistics, the conflict left physical scars on the landscape. Border posts, primary targets, were heavily damaged. Civilian areas were hit too. Homes, shops, and local markets were struck or caught in crossfire. Unexploded ordnance became a new threat. This unseen legacy would claim victims long after hostilities ended. Seen by Islamabad as a counter-terrorism measure, it was perceived by Kabul as a grave violation of sovereignty, triggering immediate escalation. A map-led account shows rapid escalation from airstrikes to conventional ground combat, while the border closure crippled Afghanistan's economy and created a dire humanitarian crisis. Looking forward from the initial violent days of the conflict, 3 distinct paths opened up. A more probable and dangerous scenario was the continuation of a low-intensity, tit-for-tat conflict, turning the Durand Line into a permanently active, simmering front line. The most catastrophic scenario was the potential for the conflict to spill over. potentially leading to the fragmentation of the country and a regional security vacuum with global consequences. As we conclude this analysis, it is crucial to end with an editorial caution. In any conflict, the first casualty is truth. Therefore, relying on independent sources is essential to piece together a more accurate picture. Understanding the difference between official accounts and verifiable facts is the only way to navigate the fog of war and truly comprehend the devastating impact of the 2025 Pak-Afghan conflict.